The House Oversight Committee is in Chappaqua, New York today, grilling former President Bill Clinton over his ties to sex predator Jeffrey Epstein. Yesterday, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton told lawmakers she only knew Ghislaine Maxwell and reportedly responded more than a dozen times, "I don't know. You'll have to ask my husband." The testimony is happening behind closed doors at the Clintons' home in Chappaqua, New York, not on Capitol Hill. And joining us to discuss is attorney Jeremy Aldridge, partner at Zealous Advocates. Good morning to you, sir. Great to see you, as always. Now, Hillary Clinton is an attorney herself, so she knows this process pretty well. For at least a dozen questions, though, she did say, "I don't know, you'll have to ask my husband." So she's already trying to separate herself from former President Bill Clinton. What do you think we'll get today from him, and what's the goal in this process?
Well, let me first say what she did yesterday was classic witness discipline. This is exactly what her attorney wanted from her, which is delineating between her conduct and her husband's conduct. So her saying, "You're going to have to ask my husband," is classic witness discipline. It's good preparation. The public may not like it. The congressional inquiry may not like it, but it's what a lawyer would tell a witness to do. What we're going to see from Bill Clinton today, frankly, is exactly the same thing. We're going to see somebody who is very well prepared. We're going to see someone who has an idea of what questions they're going to be asked. And we're going to see somebody who is very clear about what they remember, what they don't remember, and anything as far as some of the clips that have been put out and spun in the media, for instance. He's going to be very clear about what his conduct was so that he doesn't create a future problem.
Now, Ghislaine Maxwell did help fund $1 million for the Clinton Global Initiative. That's been established. That's not been disputed. So when a BBC reporter asked about this, when the files were released, Hillary said that Maxwell and Epstein were accused of horrific crimes against girls and women, and that should not be the focus, not who funded the Clinton Global Initiative. What's your thoughts on this, though, when it comes to the flow of money and funds? Because we saw former Prince Andrew arrested not because of Epstein's horrific crimes against women and girls, but because of some new revelations. He could have leaked top secret government trade documents to him.
There's absolutely no debate that the focus of Epstein needs to be the sexual child abuse, right? But when it comes to the CGI initiative, you have to ask this question. Are we talking about quid pro quo, where there was large amounts of money in exchange for political favors or trading of secrets? Or are we talking about donor board fatigue, which is a large amount of money being given, you're farming large amounts of money to further your endeavor, and there's nothing being traded? That obviously could be ferreted out by the Department of Justice if they chose to engage in that inquiry, but it's unclear what that money was used for, why it was given, and what they received, if they received a benefit at all.
Some lawmakers not happy with the fact that they had to travel to New York for this deposition. As we know, most are done here in D.C., especially when it's by the House Oversight Committee. Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett told reporters, "I don't know why the heck we didn't bring them here. If you or I got in trouble, guess what? We'd be here or we'd be in chains and they'd be dragging us in. Having them in Chappaqua, to me, is an insult to the public. I realize they got to cut a deal, but it's not a deal I would have cut." So what are the rules? I mean, some obviously believe this should have happened in D.C. It should have been open to the public. After all, we're talking about a former president and former Secretary of State. So what's the rules?
There are no rules, which is why they negotiated this. So it's not wholly uncommon for witnesses in a congressional investigation to have their attorneys reach out and to negotiate a space, what I would call a safe space or a neutral space, for an inquiry to be done. It's not uncommon for staffers to lead these depositions behind closed doors, and it's not uncommon for it to be recorded or transcribed and then to be released at a later time. So while the public may have a distaste for the Clintons not coming to Baltimore, if this Congressional Inquiry Board wanted them to come to Baltimore, or come to Washington rather, they could have negotiated.
I'm thinking, what's going on with Baltimore now? What's going on there? That's where you are right now. You mean D.C. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So the Clintons initially, of course, we know, challenged the subpoena anyway. But, Republicans said, we're gonna hold you in contempt of Congress. How serious would a contempt charge have been in this situation?
It carries a year in jail and fines. And the bigger issue for them is legacy, right? It's not necessarily just a criminal prosecution, but it's a stain on both of their legacy. You're talking about a former president and you're talking about a former Secretary of State and presidential candidate. So a lot of their nonprofits could be affected. So even if you're not talking about a true DOJ prosecution done by the U.S. Attorney's Office, you could be talking about a stain on their historical legacy.
In a deposition like this, how do attorneys typically prepare high-profile clients for this kind of congressional grilling?
We sit down and we ask them the questions first that we think are the most obvious. The biggest thing is what we actually saw yesterday from Hillary Clinton, which is you tell your witness do not, number one, make things up that you don't recall. Don't feel compelled to answer questions if you don't remember. So it's not uncommon in a grand jury investigation or in a congressional inquiry to have people say, I don't remember, because oftentimes you're being asked about things that occurred a decade ago that you may not have a clear memory of. So they're told that because if you do start saying things, something that you honestly believe but you might be wrong about, you could be prosecuted for it later. So once again, even if they don't like the answers, the number one thing is stick with what you remember and keep your answers clean, short, and concise.
What kind of culpability would one of the people perhaps mentioned in the Epstein files, what would they have if they had knowledge that they were perhaps paying for some kind of sexual act with a girl they knew was underage?
You could be prosecuted if you were victimizing. And I'm not talking about knowledge. If you're involved in the actual sexual act, whether it's the trafficking or the sexual child abuse, you could certainly be prosecuted for that act. If you simply had knowledge of things going on and failed to report them, and you were not in a certain position, for instance, healthcare providers have mandatory reporting requirements in a lot of states, it's unlikely that you could see a prosecution. And that's not uncommon with other famous people we've seen charged with this stuff, no different than R. Kelly, the famous singer. People all around him knew of it, but there was no legal liability, no criminal liability to prosecute.
All right, attorney Jeremy Eldridge, partner at Zealous Advocates. Thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The act, the department will, of course, publish it consistent with the law. The millions of Epstein files released by the Justice Department continue to spark fallout around the world. The documents are raising questions about who had contact with Jeffrey Epstein and what the professional consequences should be. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team, and we know that public backlash, Emma, has led to a slew of resignations.
Yeah.
We also know the investigations are continuing, but just run down the list of resignations thus far.
Yeah, there's been a lot. And just to be clear from the start here, being named or mentioned in these documents doesn't automatically mean that someone committed a crime, but they are of note. So in terms of the confirmed resignations or step downs after this DOJ release, first, most recent one was Børge Brende. He resigned as president and CEO of the World Economic Forum. That was a big one after scrutiny over past meetings and communications with Jeffrey Epstein. In the corporate world, Thomas Pritzker, he stepped down as executive chairman of Hyatt, citing terrible judgment in maintaining contact with Epstein. At Goldman Sachs, chief legal officer Kathy Rumler, she announced she's going to resign after disclosures about her past relationship with Epstein appeared in the DOJ material. And then looking at academia, Larry Summers, former Harvard president, Treasury secretary as well, he's going to resign from teaching at Harvard at the end of the year during a campus review of all of his Epstein ties. And then at Columbia as well, Richard Axel said he's going to step down as co-director of the Zuckerman Institute.
And you mentioned some statements earlier. Based on all of the public comments that we have received, does it sound like reputation is what is driving this?
So far, it looks like overwhelmingly reputational and institutional companies and universities. They're saying that basically we don't want this distraction or reacting to what the documents show about judgment and associations of the people that were working there. And again, resignation doesn't equal charges. In these specific cases, it's mostly just pressure and backlash. Although despite the concerning evidence that's in these files, no new charges have been brought against anybody. So, I mean, take that with what you will.
I want to get into that in a few moments. Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
Later on, Emma will be back to dig into the potential for new charges to be filed against Epstein associates following the release of the files. The Epstein file drop from the DOJ has led to a slew of resignations from prominent figures in the business and academic worlds with connections and continuous correspondence with Epstein. But one thing the files haven't led to is new charges. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. And as we know, and want to be clear, these investigations are ongoing, but many are wondering why. Speak to us about the DOJ's response.
Yeah, it's the question of the hour. And according to the Associated Press, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said that while the release contains a lot of disturbing material, including emails and photos, that doesn't automatically create a prosecutable case. So he told the AP that the DOJ just can't create evidence that doesn't exist. Those were his words. But and this is important, a 2019 prosecution memo included in the release of those files shows that federal investigators did at one point weigh whether Epstein's associates could face conspiracy charges. Much of that memo is redacted, but it confirms the question of who else could be liable. That question was formally considered.
What about, and that is interesting, but what about the state or international investigations? Could they move forward even if the DOJ does not?
Potentially, yeah. Potentially there is some legal pathways for that. So the DOJ released obviously those 3.5 million pages under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and some of that material could serve as leads for state attorneys general or foreign authorities, but they'd still need some independent evidence to file charges. And separately, the Associated Press is reporting that the DOJ now is reviewing whether any Epstein-related records were previously withheld, which could lead to some additional disclosures. But again, disclosure is not the same thing as prosecution. We're gonna have to wait and see where this goes as time goes on. There's just so much information here.
Emma, thank you. And
Thanks.
for more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com.